show.
Welcome to episode 149 of the Gluttons For Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. He's Lepore, I'm Bruno. Thank you so much for listening and watching us on YouTube as well. The 1942 Toronto Maple Leafs stand alone as the only team in NHL history to come back from a 3-0 series deficit to win the Stanley Cup. The Edmonton Oilers, unable to get it done. They were so close to pulling off one of the greatest feats, honestly, in sports history, in my opinion. Connor McDavid, so many people thought he was going to get it done after that incredible 2-game stretch where he had 8 points. It seemed like it was the Oilers to lose, but the Florida Panthers came back and played a very Florida Panthers game in Game 7 of the Cup Final to win the Stanley Cup. So we are going to give you our thoughts and opinions on Game 7 of the Cup Final, the series in general. We're obviously going to talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs free agency, and the draft is right around the corner here. So we have a lot of takes, and I promise you want to stay tuned until the very end of this episode because it is going to be very juicy. But before we get into all that, it is time to officially welcome in my partner in crime, Mr. Michael Lepore. How you doing today, man?
Anthony Bruno, is always absolutely ecstatic to be here. A post-Stanley Cup Final episode. Very excited to do it. I apologize in advance if you see me occasionally looking to my left because I have Canada-Peru on in the background. Copa America, man. I made a comment, I think it was last episode, talking about how we're going to be in the dog days of the year when it comes to the sports on television, but pretty amazing how it's set up at the moment with the Euro games happening during the day and then Copa America because like the time zone thing happens in the evening. So we're holding on a little bit longer, and before we know it, it'll be free agency and let the good times roll again, man. We'll be occupied.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. Soccer's kind of getting everyone through these days because, as you said, there's really not a lot going on the sports calendar right now. So let's dig right into this episode, Lepore.
Yeah,
the Oilers were not able to pull off the miracle comeback. There was a lot of Oilers fans in the comments calling us idiots, saying we don't know anything about hockey, because we thought that it would be very hard for a team to do something that no team has done in 82 years. So apparently we were complete idiots for thinking that Florida was going to win the Stanley Cup. But anyway, great night for Anthony Bruno and his Florida Panthers. I'm very happy right now. And it's not because the Oilers lost and I'm a massive Leaf fan and, you know, I hate the Oilers and all that. No, it's because I was invested in Florida winning the Stanley Cup. And I'm pretty happy right now. So suck it. Everyone who thinks I'm some butthurt Leafs fan had nothing to do with that. This is all about my investment in the Florida Panthers. So anyway,
you still haven't told me how much you've bet, eh? I think you're gonna keep it a secret.
No, I'm keeping it a secret.
Yeah,
I told you how much I won in one of my pools.
You did.
But no, we'll keep that a secret for now. Maybe one day I'll reveal that to the rest of GFP Nation. But what are your thoughts, man, on what we just saw in Game 7? Because first of all, I thought it was an incredible hockey game.
Yeah.
Back and forth, tight checking, physical, chances at both ends. Like, I thought it was a phenomenal game, and it was a great way to cap off the season.
Yeah, it was. I was hoping so bad for an overtime, and I'd be lying if I said that I didn't think the Oilers were going to tie it. Because it was like 2-3 minutes to go, it was almost as if Florida was set up like there was 30 seconds to go. Like almost just desperately defending and not being aggressive. So I'm like, the Oilers are going to get this. They're going to get this. And they had their chances. They came close. They couldn't get the puck over the line. Florida, a lot of bodies being sacrificed to block those shots as expected. I thought, yeah, I mean, it was a very good game. I thought it was a game that, I don't want to say, they say in soccer, a game that had lots of incident. Like, I don't feel like there was a lot of big moments to remember or like, hey, what was the TSN turning point? One of those cheesy lines. But it was a good game. What I found is it seemed like one team was in control for an extended period of time, and then it would flip. And then it would go back and forth. So you were thinking, okay, Florida's in control now. Now it's like, oh, now Edmonton's got momentum. Very, very, very wavy of a game. I'll just cut right to it, Bruno. And I don't know if this is really being talked about in the Oilers circle. They lose 2-1. So we're going to dissect the winning goal. Was that a bad goal on Skinner? Does he have to have that?
I know there was a lot of chat on, on social media saying that, a lot of chatter, I should say, on social media saying that was a weak goal from Skinner. And while I do agree to a certain extent, I don't think it was like an egregious goal that he let in. I think it was a pretty good shot from Sam Reinhart. Should he make that save? Probably, but I don't think it was, I think back to remember the goal that Jack Campbell let in the Montreal series?
No.
Like it was, I think it was Brendan Gallagher, shooting it along the ice. Like it wasn't that terrible. So no, I'm going to say it was kind of 50-50. Good shot from Reinhart, but maybe Skinner should have had it as well.
Yeah, I thought the defenseman, I don't remember who the defense was, but he played it kind of weird. Like he's in a position where he should have taken the player. And Reinhardt's a right shot on the right wing. So if he's shooting, I mean, kind of the angle it's gonna go through. And he just kind of hesitated and stayed in the middle and then ventured over when it was too late. Again, I don't remember who it was. I don't know if you do, but I didn't think he played it well at all. My thoughts going into the game were if the Oilers were going to win for some reason, I thought it was going to be a blowout. It was going to be like a 5-1, 6-1. They score early, and then it becomes a track meet for Florida, and they can't catch up. But if it was going to be a grinded out game, I had a lot of confidence in the Panthers being able to pull out that win. That stat, what is it? Over the last 2 years, I guess they're 19-0 now when leading after two periods.
That was an insane stat they showed on the broadcast after 40 minutes, how they were 18-0 over the last two playoffs when leading after two periods. And as you said, now 19-0, pretty insane.
Yeah, one of those things though, right? You're like, okay, well, Edmonton's gonna do it now.
Yeah, you thought that was the jinx. That was the ultimate broadcaster jinx, but they were able to close it out.
Yeah. So and it was that type of game. And I was talking to a buddy of mine today, and he's an Oilers fan, and he was disappointed in the way the Oilers played because he said from watching it, he was hoping for. He's like, I was hoping for a lot more intensity. He's like, I don't think they did not play a good game. He's like, they didn't look like they were going balls to the wall. And what I found very strange was the end of the game. And it's one of those things that it's like the fans who yell shoot on the power play. When it was the last minute of the game with the goalie pulled, it almost seemed like Edmonton was taking their sweet ass time getting down the ice. It's like, no, just get it down there. I know things have to set up and you have guys flowing and you're trying to execute something, but the desperation wasn't there. I agreed with him on that, but he was really and truly disappointed on how they looked. And I thought McDavid may have had his worst game of the playoffs. I mean, he blew his tire like 3 times, at least twice. When do we see that happen? So I don't know. Like, I don't know what the mood is or what the mood should be for Oilers fans right now based on the game. Because I'm sure there's some in the camp of, oh, it's, could have went either way. Some in the camp of we lost because of a bad goal. Some in the camp, man, we did not play our best game and we only lost by 1 goal, so we could have won and we had the momentum. And especially, too, how big was that goal that tied it? And here Florida gets this early goal. It wasn't on the power play. It was when the power play just ended, but their power play has been terrible all series. And then they essentially score a power play goal. And you think, okay, momentum, and then bang. Edmonton shuts them up. So, yeah, was it a strange game? I'm pointing to all these things. Is it fair to say it was a strange game? And maybe that's expected from a game 7 because there's so much anxiety and tension involved.
Well, here's what I think. If you asked the Florida Panthers before the game for the ideal game script for game 7, it was literally what you saw play out in game 7. Because there's no way they wanted that to get into a track meet, because I don't think anyone at this point in the series heading into game 7 had any confidence in the Panthers chasing a game and coming from behind. And not that they're not capable of doing it, but in this series, especially, anytime they've gone down, they've just had an extremely difficult time coming back in the game. And I know, I want to say it was game 5, when they were on home ice, and they kind of made it close in the third period. when it was 4-3 and they were really pressing at the end and almost tied the game and send it to overtime. But other than that, like I thought for sure if Edmonton scored the first goal, they were probably going to win the Stanley Cup. I thought the first goal was massive, and for Florida to score that goal, get their confidence going. But you said it. I mean, Edmonton responded right away, which was an incredible response. And even when Edmonton responded, I go, uh-oh, these Panthers are in trouble here, man. Yeah. But the rest of the game, I think the game script was perfect. They were just shutting things down defensively. They weren't taking a lot of chances offensively. And that's the other thing. It's not like, you know, because like there's different ways that you could play, right? Like the Panthers, I felt like they're a very comfortable team, just like understanding, all right, we're not going to take any chances offensively here. Let's just shut it down, clog up the middle of the ice. Like that's what they did, especially in the third period. Like they were taking zero chances offensively. Even Barkov, like there was a shift where he was like kind of second guessing, like, oh, should I go down low and try to make a play? Or never mind, McDavid's behind me. Let me get back. It just felt like, honestly, the whole playoffs, like they were just so comfortable playing that type of style where as soon as they got the lead and you get down into that final 20 minutes, like they were just going to play simple hockey, not take chances, and then lean on their defense and Sergei Bobrovsky. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why they won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah. In that conversation about the Oilers' intensity level, I did say Florida does deserve some credit, because they did a fantastic job of clogging the neutral zone and holding up the Oilers at the blue line. It's funny how sports works, right? I mean, you know, there was a buzz. There was a buzz all over Canada, and I was picking something up. This guy goes, hey, so who wins tonight? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. And I asked him who he thought, and he said, oh, there's no way McDavid's not winning. There's no way he doesn't take over and does not win this thing. And as I said, he may have had his worst game of the playoffs. People just have this expectation sometimes that you can just turn it on because it's a big moment. And I don't have an explanation as to why in certain games guys are unstoppable and why that same player in another game can be terrible. It's just, I don't know what they ate that day, the sleep they got the night before. Who knows, right? How hydrated they are. Like I have no idea. But I wonder if the Oilers have that kind of, I don't say regret, but they kind of have that feeling that, like, for crying out loud, like almost like a Leaf thing. Like we had to play our worst game on the worst day. Like here we were high flying, everything's flowing, McDavid's doing what he wants, and just they hit a brick wall. Like, I mean, I'm sure a million thoughts are going through the players' minds. Man, you're a goal away from your name on the Stanley Cup. Who knows? Like, did you think at all, I can't talk. Did you think there was any chance at all that McDavid was going to come out for the Conn Smythe?
No, honestly. No. I wasn't surprised at all when he didn't come out. And I know a lot of people have been talking about this. I don't blame him at all. Like, this dude, all he cared about was winning the cup. He did not give a flying fuck about the Conn Smythe. I mean, he would have cared about the Conn Smythe if they won the Stanley Cup. But no, I don't blame him for not coming out. I didn't think he would.
Yeah, his dad had the camera ready to go.
Oh, his dad was fired up.
That was kind of weird, eh?
His dad was like, fuck yeah, let's go. Connor won the Conn Smythe. Like, you kind of like read his lips in the crowd.
Yeah.
And his son was just like, I don't want any part of that. I'm not coming out for this picture.
Yeah. I had this discussion with some people. If you're him or if you're any player on the losing team, is there a part of you that just wouldn't want to win it and just lose and not have to think that, like, every time you look at it, it's like, yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's horrible when it's tied to a loss, but I still think it was a pretty amazing accomplishment. Anytime you win MVP of the Stanley Cup playoffs, like, I'm sure, you know, it stings right now for McDavid, but he's going to look back on it, and sure, it's going to sting looking back on it. But he's also going to say, you know what? Damn, I was pretty freaking good during that playoff run. 42 points in 25 games. Damn right, I was the best player in the playoffs. So I think as time goes on, he's going to look back and remember just how dominant he was throughout the entire playoffs.
Yeah, I think it's a thing like that where when you're sitting with your grandchildren talking about your career in the NHL, you look at it proudly. But right now, like, I don't want to go near that thing. The feeling of not winning, I can't imagine. I'm honestly surprised we've never seen I mean, you see guys getting interviewed afterwards, and you can tell they're emotional. You saw Hyman, like he was teary-eyed, and McDavid was in a low. Draisaitl, super quiet. But I'm almost surprised, and maybe there was one, I don't remember, where we saw like real emotion, like someone just break down weeping, because guys in the locker room, I'm sure, are in that state. And I'm very surprised that we've never caught that on camera, from what I remember anyway.
It's time for a quick break for a word about Manscaped. Now that the Toronto Maple Leafs are out of the playoffs, are you ready to enjoy the summer just like the Leafs? Because if you are in luck, because our friends over at Manscaped have you covered from head to toe this summer season. With the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, this ultimate all-in-one grooming kit is set to have you looking and feeling your absolute best. Trust Manscaped and unlock the confidence you need to turn heads this summer. Join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com using our exclusive code GFP20. Lepore, Manscaped never disappoints, unlike the Toronto Maple Leafs.
They always disappoint, Anthony Bruno. Gentlemen, if you are like Anthony Bruno and you have a villa on Lake Como and you rock your Speedo on the beach next to George Clooney's villa, make sure you look the part, make sure you're silky smooth, and use products from Manscaped. Like Bruno said, promo code GFP20 for 20% off and free shipping.
You heard him. Head to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping using our exclusive code GFP20. That is code GFP20 at manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping. I promise you will not be disappointed. It's time for an important message from BetterHelp, a sponsor of today's episode. Sometimes in life, we go through difficult times, whether that's personally, whether that's in a relationship, and your mental health cannot be ignored. And a lot of times, you can't tackle these situations by yourself. You need help. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. They make therapy easier and much less intimidating for a lot of people. BetterHelp lets you have therapy sessions as a phone call, video chat, or even messaging, whatever is most comfortable for you. BetterHelp will connect you with one of 30,000 therapists in their network, and in most cases, you'll be connected with a therapist within 48 hours. So go to betterhelp.com/GFP for 10% off your first month of therapy. Lepore, this service is incredible.
It is incredible, Anthony Bruno. Mental health is something that's very serious, and be aware, if you're going through a dark time, you do not have to try to beat this thing alone. There are services out there that can provide you with some great help. BetterHelp is number one when it comes to that. As Bruno mentioned, there are different ways you can get in touch with people, different ways you can contact people. It's all up to you. Go to betterhelp.com/GFP.
Join 4 million people who have used BetterHelp to live healthier and happier lives. So go to betterhelp.com/GFP for 10% off your first month of therapy to connect with a therapist and see if BetterHelp is right for you. Do you think McDavid deserved the Conn Smythe? Because I want to talk briefly about this because, listen, okay. I did have money, full transparency. I had money on Barkov winning the Conn Smythe.
Yeah.
But I do think to a certain degree he was kind of robbed. And listen, I know that McDavid set the assist record, the most assists in a single postseason, passing Wayne Gretzky. He was dominant throughout the playoffs, but man, Barkov was just as dominant. When you think about what he was able to do, shutting down every star player that he played against, going back to the first round and all the way through the Stanley Cup Final, and then even some of the plays that he made in the Cup Final, and to still finish with like a point per game, be the best 200-foot player on the ice basically every night. I mean, you could make a strong case that he should have won the MVP of the playoffs, especially considering McDavid put up a goose egg in game 6 and 7. I still think, like, I was still leaning towards almost like a 52-48, 52 to McDavid, 48% to Barkov for the Conn Smythe, but I think it should have actually been a lot closer than the vote indicated.
Yeah, it was like 16 out of 17 had McDavid first. I think just one didn't. But the camera, when they announced McDavid, the camera went on Bob. kind of.
Yeah, that was weird to me too. Everyone's like, "Oh, Bobrovsky should have won the Conn Smythe." Like Bobrovsky, let's not forget, he had a pretty shitty 3-game stretch there.
Yeah.
When the Panthers lost 3 straight games, like Barkov, I think was easily their best player throughout the entire playoffs. So that's the guy who I think, if you're going to say anyone on that team deserved the Conn Smythe, I think it was him.
Yeah, the way it goes, and this gets talked about every year, it's not the NBA, it's not the NBA, it's not the MVP of the final. It's the NBA, it's the MVP of the entire playoffs. And be that the case, the final is still going to get more weighted. So I think, to your point, yeah, those games cost Bob, because like recent memory, right? You think of those games like, no, how can he get the MVP? But as far as McDavid deserving it, the way I see it is he broke the assist record. It was the most points in a playoff season. What was it, in 30 years?
Yeah, something ridiculous.
So really, if it is possible for a losing player who's not a goalie to get it, I mean, he's got to get it, right? If it is possible, he's got to get it. So I'm okay with it, and I thought he would win, and I thought he should win.
No, it's fair. And like I said, I thought it was razor thin, honestly. Like, I think Barkov had a great case. But when you put up 10 more points than the next closest guy, which he did, Evan Bouchard was the second leading scorer in the playoffs. McDavid had 10 more points than him. If you're going to give it to a guy on the losing team, this is the year you do it. This is the first time that a skater on the losing team has won the Conn Smythe since Reggie Leach in 1976.
Yeah.
So if you're ever going to give it to someone on the losing team, this is probably the ideal scenario. So listen, I think he did deserve it, but I don't think it was as big of a landslide, maybe as the voters basically put it. I think Barkov, I think there should have been some first place votes for Barkov as well. But anyway,
does it come into play that there's a debate on Florida as to who should get it, where for the Oilers, there's no debate? Is that part of it?
I think that's a fair take as well. On the Oilers, it was far and away Connor McDavid. And on Florida, I mean, you could make a case for Barkov, Bobrovsky, Sam Reinhart if you wanted to, who scored the cup-winning goal and had, I believe, 10 goals throughout the playoffs. Yeah, I think that was a factor as well. But Lepore, there's another thing that I want to get off my chest based on what we watched in this series. There were some very high-end players who did not have a good Stanley Cup final.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, we're going to bring this back to the Toronto Maple Leafs. But you know who I thought was garbage in the Cup final? Like, I thought this player I'm not going to go as far to say they were the worst player on the ice, but holy shit, was Matthew Tkachuk a ghost the entire Cup final. This dude had 3 points in 7 games. I mean, if you told me that he just didn't play, like, I may have believed you, because he did nothing. Not only was Matthew Tkachuk back, Leon Draisaitl, 0 goals, 3 assists in 7 games in the Cup final. So 2 of the most prominent players for either team basically did nothing. And with Matthew Tkachuk, the reason I'm harping on Tkachuk is because he's viewed as this playoff player, the perfect playoff performer, has heart, has grit, he's physical, can score. I thought throughout most of that Stanley Cup final, he couldn't keep up. The speed of the game, I think, kind of got the best of him. There were like 5, honestly, you could easily say that there was like 4 or 5 Florida Panthers forwards who were more effective than Matthew Tkachuk. I thought Barkov had a better series. Reinhart had a better series. Evan Rodriguez, who led the Panthers in scoring in the Cup final. I thought Sam Bennett looked a lot more explosive than Matthew Tkachuk. So it just goes to show, everyone wants to run Mitch Marner out of town. And you have a guy like Matthew Tkachuk, this playoff performer, who I thought was honestly pretty terrible in the Cup final. There was not a single moment where I was like, wow, what a shift from Matthew Tkachuk, or wow, what a play from Matthew Tkachuk. And this team was still able to win a Stanley Cup with one of their best players not performing anywhere near the level they're capable of in the Cup final.
I think what people would respond to that with, yeah, but we've seen Tkachuk do it and we know he can. Like last year, he put up a lot of numbers. He had a lot of winning goals, but he is a strange player because I mean I think he's a great player, and I even saw something once they posted. I don't know if it was Dom Decision or one of the other advanced stats heavy guys posted a thing of how many points above expected is a player worth, and when I say points, I mean like team points in the standings. And McDavid was obviously number one. If I remember correctly, I think Matthews was two and Kachuk was three because he is strong defensively and he does all the little things right. But I'm with you that quite often I watch the Panthers and I don't notice them. And I don't know, maybe it's because he's taking a more defensive role, so you're just not going to see the stuff that ends up in highlights. But yeah, he didn't have a good final, full stop. And back to my point earlier, how people just think guys can turn it on. Like, I'm sure he's disappointed in himself. I mean, he doesn't give a shit. He's going to have a ring on his finger. But I'm sure if you look back at this series and they lost, he would have thought, yeah, like I didn't play well, and I don't know why. But you're right. He wasn't good. And can I say something about Draisaitl? Like, I love Leon Draisaitl. I think there's a good chance he ends up being one of the highest. He ends up being the highest paid player in the league. Like, I think he's that good. I find that he doesn't get criticized when he plays poorly. Almost like people are afraid you can't point to Draisaitl. And
yeah, because even, you look at his stats at the end of the playoffs, the dude had 31 points in 25 games. Like, he put up the numbers again. And I think maybe that's what it is, because over these last, what has it been? 3 playoff runs, the guy's been a beast, right? He's putting up well over a point per game, and people are just afraid to take shots at him, but he was bad.
Didn't he
0 goals and 3 assists in the Cup final? So what you said about Kachuk, how he would have looked back if they lost and said, holy shit, I was terrible. What do you think Draisaitl's thinking today?
Didn't Draisaitl ghost against Vegas last year too, though?
I got to look up his stats against Vegas.
I don't remember him being very
second
good.
round. But yeah, I mean, not a great look for Leon Draisaitl. And sure, people will probably still give him a pass because we've seen what he's done in the playoffs in terms of his point production, but you got to be better than 0 goals and 3 points in 7 games. It just goes to show, like, any of these top guys could have a bad series. They could have a bad 3-game stretch. They could have a bad series. And I fully understand that these guys were dealing with injuries. We're hearing today, there's reports that all of these guys were injured.
I hate
all the guys that I mentioned, Kachuk, even McDavid for that matter, Draisaitl, go down the list. But, even to bring it back to the Leafs, Austin Matthews and William Nylander had head injuries in the first round. Mitch Marner had a high ankle sprain at the end of the season. So I don't want to hear like all this injury stuff. The fact of the matter is that even these top players, they can turn into complete ghosts when it matters most. So everyone wants to run Mitch Marner out of town.
To Marner, eh?
They want to run every star player on the Leafs out of town when they have a bad series. But then we don't want to acknowledge when Matthew Tkachuk was like the 6th best forward on the ice for the Panthers, and Leon Draisaitl didn't score a goal, I believe, I want to say it was like his last 9 playoff games, didn't even score a goal. Like, imagine if he did anything. McDavid's putting up 8 points in 2 games to get this team back into the series. Imagine Draisaitl had showed up and done something.
Okay, well, this is a genuine question because it has to do with the media coverage and how the Leafs are treated. But like I said, it is a genuine question. You said he had 31 points in 25 games. That was the number. If the Leafs lost in the final and Marner had 31 points in 25 games, but had 0 goals, 3 assists in the final, do you think he'd be getting criticized?
I think he would be getting criticized because you know what he did last year, Lepore?
I remember
when the Leafs lost in 5 games to the Panthers. Mitch Marner had 14 points in 11 playoff games. But everyone talks about, when it came down to the deciding games, Mitch Marner was a ghost again. Well, guess what? He had 14 points in 11 playoff games. And guess what, everybody? Mitch Marner has more career playoff points than Austin Matthews. If you don't believe me, go look it up.
Did you see, I don't know if you listened to the Dangle podcast, they were going over it. Career points of the Leafs. Matthews, I believe it was Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares, career playoff points. And I think Matthews' career points were just slightly above what McDavid put up this season, and Marner was a few more. But
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
in their entire playoff career, and then they made the point that I think there was a Sens podcast that was kind of making fun of themselves and said had McDavid played for the Sens and put up that amount of points he did in the playoffs, he would have been like the fifth leading scorer like in the regular season on the team. And that's a compliment to McDavid as much as a shot at the Leafs and the Sens. But no, it's that's a loaded one, Bruno. That's a loaded one. We can have a podcast dedicated to how the Leafs star players are viewed. But the fact of the matter is, people give you a pass when you win. And when I say win, I mean win rounds and go deep and thinking you're close. So if you want to use that as a segue as to, watching this final and how close or far the Leafs are, I say we do it.
Yeah, let's get right into that because actually on my way home from work today, I was listening to TSN radio and I was listening to Overdrive and they were talking about the Leafs and where they stand and maybe how far away they are and how they have to change their game. And it's still like I'm still not able to process the way that people are thinking about this because to me it makes absolutely no sense. Like I completely disagreed with what a lot of the guys were saying on Overdrive today. How they were talking about like this series should show the Toronto Maple Leafs like this is the right way to play in the playoffs, and Brad Treliving is in now, and that's what he believes in, and that's why he's bringing in like he wants more physicality and size and all that. And not that I completely disagree with that, but if you've been watching this Leaf team over the last, let's call it 2 or 3 playoff runs, I think they have changed their game. I think they have been a way better defensive team. I think they have been physical. Like, did you watch that Bruins Leaf series? At any point in that series, did you think the Leafs were not like physical enough? And weren't, I don't know, showing enough heart. I mean, holy shit, they came back from 3-1 down. I'm pretty sure I think they also led the series in hits. Like at not one point during that series did I think the Leafs were like lacking size and physicality and grit. No. Once again, the story, as it's been the last number of playoff runs, this team can't fucking score when it matters most. And I don't want to hear this bullshit about the Leafs being like this perimeter offensive team.
Yeah.
And they score all these goals because they're all just like floating around on the perimeter. Yeah, Austin Matthews and William Nylander are like two of like the best inner slot players in the NHL. And maybe this is where you can criticize Mitch Marner a little bit more, where maybe he doesn't quite get into the middle of the ice in the same way that those guys do. But shit, Marner scored a goal against the Bruins, which I thought was like one of the highlight reel goals of the playoffs for the Leafs. He cut to the middle of the ice, made a great move, backhand, and scored. Like, so don't give me this bullshit that the Leafs, like, I don't know, aren't able to play playoff hockey. Like I don't think the Leafs need to do a ton, honestly, to change their game. And Lepore, just to stick on this for a second, like, I don't think they need to go into free agency and like start signing all these defensemen and overpaying these defensemen who don't deserve the money, because I don't think that's going to actually make them a better team. And I don't think that's going to bring them more success in the playoffs, because I think defensively they've been fine. It's these players who have put up all of these points in the regular season need to find a way to do the same thing in the playoffs. And I don't know why it's not happening. But I don't think it's a matter of that this team needs to completely change its identity and change the way they play in the playoffs, because I think they've actually done that. And now it's just finding a way to actually put the fucking puck in the back of the net.
Yeah. It's fun to ask people questions about how a season's going or how a playoff is going with regard to which teams rank where as far as certain stats goes. Like going into this playoffs, or we're at the end of the playoffs now. Ask a random fan, where do you think Florida ranks in hits? Oh, near the top. They'd be like, oh, the Florida Panthers, they're near the top. I saw a number. It said over the last 2 years combined, Florida was well below average in hits. They're not as much of a hitting, forechecking team as everyone thinks they are. It's just because they win and people attribute it to like the heart and character, and they're a balanced team. The other thing I don't like, and this one's easy, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too. What you'll do is, if your favorite team, say, is not a playoff team, you'll watch the playoffs and you'll say, oh my God, we're so far away because you're watching playoff hockey. Or say like us, like loser Leaf fans, we're watching the Stanley Cup Final and we are a playoff team and we're like, oh my God, look at this intensity level. Look at how hard these guys are going, trying to win this thing. We're not close. And I think it's unfair to do that. In the moment we trust our eyes and these thoughts come into our head. But I think the reality is that intensity is there because it is the Stanley Cup Final, right? It's not like the Oilers just had more intensity all playoffs. No, it gradually gets bigger and more tense, and that anxiety raises, just like from the regular season to the playoffs for the teams that don't make the playoffs. So I think it's an easy thing to do for teams or I should say fan bases to watch the playoffs, watch rounds deeper in the playoffs and say, wow, my team's not close. There's no way. Well, I'll say it, like, and people call me a homer as much as they want. If a fully healthy Toronto Maple Leafs tomorrow played a 7-game series against a fully healthy Edmonton Oilers or a fully healthy Florida Panthers team, I'm not saying I would pick the Leafs,
but
I wouldn't be like, oh,
they're going to mop 7 games.
Yeah, they're not going to mop the floor with us. I'd be like, yeah, it's going to come down to goaltending. Their goaltending is better than ours if it's Bobrovsky. Edmonton's guys seem to show up more than our guys, and they'll outscore us. But it would be a series. Like when it's that easy to say, oh, we don't have this intensity. Okay, well, then you think it's going to be a sweep, and that's not the case.
Yeah, it's just I can't wrap my head around this thought. The people who say that the Leafs are so far off. You want to know who's actually far off? Teams like the Ottawa Senators or the Buffalo Sabres, who can't even make the fucking playoffs. That's who's far off. Not the Toronto Maple Leafs, who every year make the playoffs, rack up 110 points in the regular season, and then go to Game 7 and lose in dramatic fashion every single playoff run. Only once during the Matthews and Marner era, and not that I'm trying to defend the Leafs at every turn here, but only once has a playoff series, actually twice, has a playoff series not gone the distance. The first ever playoff series against Washington, and then the 5-game series against Florida. Every other playoff series has gone the distance. They were 1 goal away in overtime, getting past the Boston Bruins, who I didn't think were a very good hockey team. But then the Leafs are matched up against Florida. I think I would have picked Florida to beat the Leafs.
Yeah, we all would have. Yeah.
But don't give me this shit that wouldn't have gone 6 or 7 games. I think you're crazy if you think Florida would have mopped the floor with the Leafs. They just wouldn't have. Straight up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't understand this thought that, like, the Leafs are so far off. Sure, could any team use more size and physicality, like, on the back end? Like, when you look at the last 2 teams that have won the Cup in Vegas and Florida, like, their decors, they're all big, they're all mobile, they all hit. Like, sure, could the Leafs use a little bit more of that? Could they upgrade their decor? Yeah, I think so. But I don't think you need to go into free agency and start throwing out long-term big money contracts to guys like Nikita Zadorov and even Brandon Montour for that matter. Like, I think that's when even Brett Pesce for that matter. Like, these are not guys that you should be like running into free agency being like, we're going to give you a 7-year deal for $7 to $8 million. I'm not saying they're all in that range. I know they're kind of all in a different tier when you think of like Montour, Pesce, Zadorov, but it's like, I'm not in the camp that you should just go into free agency and just throw money at all that D-men and think that that's going to solve your problems when this team has had trouble scoring in the playoffs every single year.
Yeah. We've been talking about the Panthers, but I don't think there's a hockey fan on the planet who would look at the Edmonton Oilers and the first thing that would pop in their mind is, wow, that team is grit. It's like, no, they have fucking talent. They're going to score more than you and they're going to skate you into the ground. And like I said, the stat about Florida and where they rank in terms of hitting, I would assume, again, maybe I'm wrong because how I said before, people just have assumptions on these teams, but I would guess the Oilers aren't like the top or in that first third at least when it comes to that, because I just think of guys on their team. Who'd you look at on Edmonton and say, wow, they're overly physical, even on their D? That's not
no one, man.
Yeah.
Like, even like, I don't know, maybe like Ekholm.
Sure.
Like, and he's not even like overly physical. Like, I think he's a really good defenseman, but he's not out there like striking fear.
Yeah. And this is not an insult to the Oilers. This is just saying this whole idea of grit and hitting and punching guys in the face after the whistle gets you to the cup. No, the Oilers were a goal away and they're not that team at all.
like, think about how differently we think about like what it takes to be a winning team if the Oilers win this in game 7. If the Oilers win the cup,
You
how
think?
differently are we thinking about like how you're supposed to build a team in the playoffs? Because then it becomes like, wow, now we're in the era of offense now.
Yeah.
McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, sure, they learned how to play sound defensive hockey as well, and they're responsible. Like, you have to play good defensively to win a cup. There's no surprise there. But I think there'd be a little bit of a different conversation about how you build a winning team. And I said this on the last podcast. Everyone's talking about the cap space, trade Marner, all this cap space. The Oilers were in the cup final, paying Darnell Nurse $9.25 million and Jack Campbell $5 million. $14.25 million tied up in basically replacement to below replacement level players. And this team came one goal away from winning the Stanley Cup.
Yeah. One thing I would have liked about the Oilers coming back to win, I'm hitting the nail on the head over and over again here, how I hate the whole heart and character thing, and people think certain players can just turn it on. Florida has that reputation as one of those teams among like the general NHL fan base. That team would have blown a 3-0 lead. And I was gloating last year, Bruno. I was gloating because last year, the Boston Bruins, the big bad Bruins who are going to hammer you into the ground, and they want it more than you, and they just have so much grit and character and determination. You can't beat them. No, you can. They can be up 3-1 and blow it. So I would have taken some satisfaction in Florida doing that, just to show people like it's not like this mental thing that you can just turn on and off of. No, we're not gonna lose. And I heard that take today from someone about McDavid in the locker room. I had hockey this morning. We were in the locker room, and just how he was heavily criticizing him. So he wasn't big enough for the moment, and he couldn't handle it, and he's got to be better. And it's true. Even McDavid would tell us that he has to be better in a game like that. And I'm sure Oilers fans say the same thing. But he's the best hockey player in the world. Even him, he can't wake up in the morning and be like, "I'm gonna win. I've decided." Like, no, there's guys of unbelievable talent trying to stop you. And I'll ask, this is off topic, Bruno, but this came up in the locker room as well. And there was some pretty heavy debate on this. That penalty that Matthew Tkachuk took in the defensive zone.
I thought that was a bullshit call where he blew a tire. And
we disagree.
I forgot who exactly he tripped.
Yeah.
Was it Fogle or McDavid? It may have even been McDavid, but I thought that was a bullshit call. Like, sure, you got to be in control, I guess you could say, of yourself, but he blew a tire. He's sliding along the ice, accidentally tripped someone, if you want to even call it a trip. I thought that was a bad call, to be honest.
See, I disagree, Bruno, because my take is if it happens in the neutral zone and it's a nothing play, yeah, who cares? Like let's move on. Who cares? It allowed the player to walk in. So I looked at it that way, and I was like, well, no, now you can't. There's the scoring chance. So no, now you have to like call this. And that's loaded, and you shouldn't be nitpicking based on the zone and whatever. But I'm not gonna say I hated the call, because I'll make the point too. If I'm skating and my stick, someone steps on my stick, they fall. That's a tripping penalty. So should it be treated the same way as a case like that? I don't know, but I just thought it was interesting, like hockey discussion among fans.
Yeah, no, I can totally see both sides. You made a good point about McDavid saying, like, he can't just wake up in the morning and say, like, I'm going to win my team the Stanley Cup. And sure, maybe he did that over game 4 and 5 when he put up 8 points in 2 games. But at the end of the day, I've said this like so many times on this podcast, like, hockey is not like these other sports. The best players, the best forwards are only on the ice like 23 to at most 25 minutes a game. Mm-hmm. That's like a little more than 1/3 of a hockey game. This isn't basketball when you're in the NBA finals and your best player is on the court for 40 out of 48 minutes, touching the ball on every possession, or when your quarterback touches the ball on every snap on offense. I mean, hockey's a different beast, man. There's only so much you can do. Even if you're the best player in the world, even if you're the best player we've ever seen since Wayne Gretzky and Connor McDavid, there's really only so much he can do. So I know people are like banging on him today, and I've heard some takes like, oh, this is a huge hit on his legacy because he wasn't able to win the cup. Like, I just don't know what else he really could have done. Sure, he probably could have been a little bit better in game 6 and 7 by his standards, putting up 0 points. There's no question about that. But I mean, holy shit, man. I mean, there's only so much one guy can do on a hockey team. It's just the nature of the sport.
Yeah, I was attending, it was a Hockey Canada coaching clinic, like one of those things you have to do to go to like the next level and coach certain kids. And the guy running the clinic had his projector and he posted it was the 1996 World Cup of Hockey, Game 3, Canada USA. You look at these rosters, they're Hall of Fame ballots, right? And he had the list of all the players, and he had next to their name the amount of time in that game that they had the puck. And if I remember correctly, Sakic had the puck more than any other player on the ice. And it was something like 4 minutes the entire game. And that's the most a player had. So what influence? I mean, you can influence the game, obviously, but it just goes to show you that you're not a quarterback. You're not taking the snap and you have the ball. If the Chiefs are down by 3 with a minute to go, Patrick Mahomes has the ball. He can make the play. Basketball, you can get the ball to the guy to the guy who's going to win the game for you, or worth the best chance to win the game for you. You can't create a scoring chance for McDavid. You can't just decide you're going to get him a scoring chance. And that's the difference with it. And that, again, comes back to the point I was making earlier about how these guys don't just decide to win, or they wake up and they're like, yeah, I don't really want it.
Or they don't just decide to lose, where everyone thinks like,
yeah.
Oh, the Leafs just like every game 7, they just decide to lose. And sure, they've been losing all these game 7s, but I think a lot of it even just comes down to luck. They've been in so many coin flip situations. Like, I hate to compare, like, Lepore. I play a lot of fantasy sports. Okay, fantasy hockey, fantasy baseball, fantasy basketball, fantasy football. Lepore, I'm on a run right now where I have like 9 consecutive second place finishes in fantasy sports. Like, am I doing something wrong? Like, I'm literally in the final.
Second's pretty good.
And in some cases I've still won a little bit of money from it, but I haven't finished in first. It's been like nine times in a row where I've been in the final and lost. It's insane. And I've won championships in the past. It's not like I've never won championships, but I'm in this run right now, this rut, if you'll call it that, where I'm just losing all these coin flip battles in the final. And sometimes it comes down to that. Like, I take a step back. I'm like, did the team I build, like, did it have flaws? Did I make a mistake? Did I make like a managerial mistake in the final? And I'm like, no, I mean, sometimes it just comes down to like, fuck, it was just bad fucking luck. Like, how do you lose 9 finals in a row? How do you lose in the first round basically every year outside of 1 year if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs? And again, I'm not trying to defend the Leafs completely, but it gets to a point where it's like, sometimes it's just pure bad luck. Really. And we don't want to admit that. We never want to admit that it's luck, but sometimes that's really what makes the difference.
Yeah. I mean, Florida and Edmonton could play that game again tomorrow, and maybe Edmonton wins 5-1. You don't know.
Yeah.
Just on the day. Again, McDavid had the right meal, and he's flying, and he feels good. Sports, man. Sports. And people are going to dissect it. We have a podcast, so we talk about it ourselves, and people are going to have the takes when they watch it. But it's just on the day, and anyone can win.
Lepore, is there anything else you want to get off your chest before we wrap up this post Stanley Cup Final episode?
Oh, it's our last podcast for a while, Bruno, where we're actually going to have some hockey to talk about. So that's pretty disappointing. But we got the draft coming up, then free agency. Hopefully we got some signings to talk about, some trades to talk about. There's buzz with a few. I don't know if you saw that note. It's going around. Apparently Joseph Wall is about to extend. It was a 3 or 4 year deal. Kevin Weeks reported at $3.5 to $4 million. So maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but we'll find out soon, hopefully. So disappointing that the season's over. But as I said, there's always stuff to talk about. So we'll get through July and August somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting because every year our like summer episodes are some of our most watched episodes when there's no hockey going on, because people love the off season. They love free agency. They love the player movement. So I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about. You mentioned Joseph Wall, Kevin Weeks reporting that the Leafs are going to lock him up. to what looks like a reasonable contract. And we'll see what Brad Treliving does in free agency. And then we'll see if there's any fireworks around the draft. So when you hear from us next, it'll be big milestone for us, episode 150. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot to break down when it comes to the Leafs and their offseason moves.
Yeah.
But that is going to do it for episode 149 of the Gluttons For Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. If you're a first-time listener, long-time listener, and you really enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review on either Apple or Spotify. And if you're watching us on YouTube, it would be a massive help if you smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below with your takes on some of the topics that we discussed on today's episode. And while you're at it, ring the notification bell so you know exactly when the GFP podcast is posting some new content. So for Michael Lepore, I'm Anthony Bruno. It was a great hockey season, but I can't wait for next season because it's going to be the Leafs year, everybody. The Leafs are coming, baby. Let's go.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Oh, frick.
GFP. All right. Until next time, everyone, enjoy the summer, and we'll chat very, very soon.
Thanks, everyone.